This morning, Virginia was the site of an apparently politically motivated mass shooting. The shooter targeted a group of Republican lawmakers, staffers, lobbyists, and others who were practicing for a charity baseball game. This was near the Eugene Simpson Stadium Park in Alexandria. Police received a call reporting shooting at around 7:09 a.m. and arrived just 3 minutes later. Representative Mo Brooks, who was on the scene, said that he heard about 50 shots. And as you'll hear later on, initially sporadic shooting, and then it eventually became very clear that this was an attack on the people playing baseball there. The assailant was shot by Capitol Police in a gunfight, taken to a hospital, died of his injuries later on in the morning. Now, multiple people have been shot, but House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was in what seemed like the worst condition initially, was taken to the hospital, underwent surgery, and remains in critical condition. There have been sort of sporadic reports about the condition of the others who were shot at the site, and it seems like they're doing in relatively better condition at this point. This is as of when we're broadcasting live. We don't know when this goes up on YouTube what the state might be. But as I said, 4 others were shot, including Zachary Barth, a congressional staffer, Matt Mika, a lobbyist, and Special Agent David Bailey and Special Agent Crystal Griner, 2 members of the Capitol Police, were attacked at that point. Now, Rand Paul was one of the lawmakers that was on the scene there, and he has described what it was like, and we're gonna show you some of that video now.
The first shot was sort of an isolated shot. I grew up in the South, and I just thought someone had discharged a shotgun, which isn't that unusual in the South. But then I thought, well, we are in the city, we're not in the country here. But then after the first shot, then there was a rapid succession of shots, 5 or 10 shots. In the field, I see Representative Scalise is shot, but moving, and he's trying to drag himself through the dirt out into the outfield. There are 2 staffers in right field, only about 10 feet from me, but there's about a 20-foot fence separating me from them. And they were laying down, but then I'm seeing the shots hitting the dirt around them. And they're trying to make a difficult decision. Do we lay here, stay low, and hope he doesn't hit us? And this is a difficult decision, or does the shooter just advance and come closer and shoot you? And so you have to make a decision at some point whether to stay or run. But it takes a few minutes to determine. You're not sure where they're coming from. I mean, my instinct was they were coming from the third baseline, and as more shots were fired, we were pretty sure that was, but you're kind of not sure which side of the tree to stand on because you're not sure where the shots are coming from.
So we'll have a little bit more from Rand Paul a little bit later, but obviously when you're hearing him give that account, I mean, it sounds absolutely horrific. You don't expect to hear that sort of story at all, let alone involving senators. You expect, well, they've got to be protected at all times. There's got to be tons of bodyguards and everything. But while it's certainly tragic, it's not unknown. It's not particularly rare in the United States. I mean, today also there's a shooting in San Francisco at a UPS center. 3 killed before the shooter killed himself. And I'm sure that their experience there was very similar to what Rand Paul was recounting in that video. And there will be anywhere from 2 to 9 shootings of that sort in the United States today and tomorrow and the next day. That's the world that we've constructed for ourselves, that we've allowed to develop. It's particularly salient perhaps when it happens to politicians, but it's just as real every other day.
Yeah, look, these are always incredibly difficult stories to report on, and I know that later on we're gonna get into the political ramifications of all of this and how it's become politicized already. But just focusing specifically on the shooting and just how horrific it was, you're right. I mean, this has become too commonplace. Oftentimes, a lot of these shootings don't even get any media attention because they happen so often. And if we focused on mass shootings or shootings in general, that's the entire show, right? And so it becomes incredibly frustrating because it happens over and over again. After Sandy Hook happened, there was somewhat of an assumption that there would be some action taken, something, and there was no real change, and it'll continue happening. And so it's frustrating because everyone immediately goes to their corners, everyone immediately starts blaming each other, everyone immediately stops taking responsibility. And look, one of the things that comes up with some of these shootings is the issue of rhetoric. And I think rhetoric is important. I don't care if it's Democrats, I don't care if it's Republicans. I think the way that we talk about individuals, especially our opponents, matters. And with that said, I think that we've moved so far away from being civilized, right? And we just demonize each other and antagonize each other over and over again, and we do it in like the cruelest ways. And it's not good. We've created a toxic environment on top of a lack of gun regulation, on top of all the other issues or factors that play a role in these types of shootings. That's my take on it.
I think that, I mean, mass shootings obviously are a huge phenomenon that is really specific to America, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're an empire. We carry out, imperial killings, mass killings all around the world. Civilians are dying everywhere. Trump is ramping that up, but this seems to be different and more specific, almost like the Chris Dorner thing where he was targeting cops. This guy seemed to have a very specific motive and agenda, especially since he asked the guy, are those Republicans or Democrats? And I think, yes, all the stuff is flying out. He was a Bernie supporter, just like in the wake of the Portland guy, people are just jumping to their corners. But it is interesting that, A, he did target Republicans, and B, I mean, we are living in a country where there's this kind of xenophobic conspiracy that's painting Trump as treasonous alongside the entirety of the GOP. And some people could take that very seriously and act out. I almost feel like it's the reverse of the Pizzagate gunman, where this guy, rhetoric does matter, where this guy came to the pizza shop and could have killed people, and this guy almost could have taken the Russiagate conspiracy theory to a whole new level where he felt like he needed to take action in his own hands. It's completely horrible.
I disagree with you on it being a conspiracy theory. I think that there's actual evidence involving Russia and its involvement in our election, and the Pizzagate thing was absolute nonsense, right? The Seth Rich thing, and I know some of you who are, overzealous about that issue are gonna get mad, but I don't care. There's no evidence to the Seth Rich story either, right? And so there are conspiracy theories flying around, and there's a big problem with that. But I see, Russia as being completely different from Pizzagate and from Seth Rich. That's just my take on it. I mean, I know some people disagree, but I mean, how many people involved in those investigations have shown that there was involvement by Russia? You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, a bunch of Democrats are just making it up and it's just a conspiracy by Democrats. No, you have Democrats and Republicans, elected officials, members of intelligence communities saying, no, Russia's a problem. And so drawing or shining a light on that is not the same as inciting violence, encouraging people to go out and take action against elected officials, violent action against them.
I think we're getting off track here. I think it's interesting that you brought up Rand Paul, because he, I think last year tweeted, the Second Amendment is important specifically for when people want to target the government when it becomes tyrannical. And I think that, it's just interesting that he was there on this baseball field recounting the horror of what happens when someone comes in and conducts one of these mass shootings. It's just an interesting kind of contradiction.
Yeah, I would argue that's the sort of rhetoric that we shouldn't see. In no way saying that he deserves to be there or anything like that. I would change that sort of rhetoric in the future. I think that there are people who are enthusiasts for the early years of America who love to throw around terms like watering the tree of liberty and everything. I think that is very dangerous rhetoric too, even though it sounds old-timey, people take it very seriously. But yeah, and I know I mentioned to you before the show, someone was spreading a fake image of the shooter walking around with a sign with that tweet on it. It's not actually true, which doesn't stop it from being retweeted thousands of times.
Oh God.
But it's not actually true. You are right though that this does stand out because generally Republicans are not targeted in the same way. As Anna said, not much has changed in terms of access to guns and all that. We have no idea if this guy theoretically could have been influenced by much of that. The only thing really that has changed since Sandy Hook is that 10 to 20 million more guns have been sold. And likely today and tomorrow, far more guns will be sold. We find that in every mass shooting. There is one thing that I do want to get to though that theoretically could have helped in this particular case. First, I want to read this tweet because while Republicans in this case were targeted by the shooter, it appears Emma O'Connor reports that Representative Nanette Diaz-Barragán tells me that multiple Democratic members of the House have already gotten calls in the wake of the shooting saying, you guys are next. And linked to a screenshot of a number of tweets saying those sorts of things being sent to Democratic lawmakers. I'm sure Republicans as well. If we could bring up this next list here, you're gonna see a little bit of the information about the criminal background of the shooter. And there's some information. I generally don't like to spread the name of the person in this sorts of events, but it's there, do with it what you will. But this guy did have a history of arrests, not all of them involving violence directly, but some of them. And one back in 2006 assaulted his girlfriend, was found with multiple weapons, including a gun at that point. And at this point, thankfully, many people, including Naomi from TYT, have reported that if you go back and look at domestic terrorists and mass shooters, there's a very high correlation with acts of domestic violence against their partners. And so theoretically, if we took that a little bit more seriously, if we consider that as a possible place where a little bit more gun control could happen, and there have been attempts in some states, like Connecticut recently had something like that, theoretically with some more investigation and perhaps a bit more gun control in the wake of death threats against domestic partners, we might avoid a few mass shootings. We'd also avoid a lot fewer killed women, I think, in this country, because that is not even as rare as mass shootings.
I just feel like there isn't going to be a solution to this.
Yeah.
Even though members of Congress have been attacked, even though it's actually affecting them negatively, I don't think that there's going to be much of a change. Yeah. And that's the frustrating part, that this is, for me, repetition over and over again, these devastating stories. And for me, it doesn't matter, the victim's political ideology. It doesn't matter what they voted on or what their record is or who they've supported. None of that matters. At the end of the day, we're all people, right? And so no one should have to live in fear. No one should have to worry about possibly being the next victim. I mean, if I was a member of Congress right now, considering how polarized the country is, how toxic the environment is, how crazy people have become, I would be terrified. I would want no part of it. And so it's frustrating. Again, I don't see a solution to this.
To that point, I mean, was it Steve King's opponent was running against him?
Right.
Was it Steve King? I believe it was Steve King. And she just a couple of weeks ago dropped out, saying, I've received, amongst other reasons, I've received many death threats, and I just don't want to expose myself to that threat. And I even said that, I mean, I totally understand why you'd feel terrorized, and I'm sure, especially because it's the supporters of Steve King, they must be incredibly vicious and violent in many cases, especially online. I don't think there's a woman in this country that has existed in social media online for a number of years and hasn't gotten death and rape threats. But yeah, it's just becoming more common, and now, in hindsight, it looks like her move might have been very wise. But yeah, look, I don't think there will be any legislative solution because the companies that pay these lawmakers are going to continue to have a profit motive to sell more guns. They benefit financially when mass shootings happen. And we can moderate our rhetoric, but we're a country of 330 million people, a country of more than 300 million guns. There will always be people ready to commit acts of political violence unless we do everything we can beyond just rhetoric to try to stop it.
One of the congressmen that I think was at the scene, many of them were talking today about their experience. And one of them said, this is what we do in America. If someone punches us, we punch back. That's just what we've been taught since we were 1 year old. You punch back, you punch back. And if they punch you, you punch them with two hands, you blow their head open. That's just the way we are. So if we're afraid or if we're angry, this is what we do, we attack. Now, what they also said, his point was, we're still gonna have this baseball game tomorrow, which is fine, right? This is where the change will be, to your point, Anna. This is a numbered group of people, powerful people. They can change the security protocol. They can change the number of security that's around them. What saved their lives, I don't know if we're gonna get to this with Rand Paul's statement about it. What saved from a massacre was that there was Capitol Police people there, and the only reason those two Capitol Police were there was because Scalise, who happened to be the one congressman that was shot, he's in leadership. And so that's the reason they're there. If not for him even being on the team, it'd have been a lot worse, they speculate. So that could be the change that would happen. I don't know how, logistically how it would happen, but suddenly every congressperson could have some kind of security protocol. Rand Paul said, I go to gas stations and grocery stores. Now they're worried about it. Perfectly, I understand that. But now this the Sandy Hook kids, what are they gonna do? They're gonna start giving security to everyone in the country that has to deal with a mass shooting. We don't know when it's gonna happen next. These guys are named people. They're gonna protect them.
What do you get for Young Turks membership? It's a mystery. Only one way to find out. TYTnetwork.com/join.